Welcome to Dead Man Talking. Tonight's show is a compilation of terrifying wilderness and forest encounters of the cryptid variety. I'm sure you guys will enjoy these stories as much as I. As ever, please do let me know down below in the comments, and please do like and share. And without further ado, let's get into tonight's first story, entitled On the Bayou Road. Let's get straight into that. Growing up on a bayou, you come to accept certain truths. There are creatures in the swamp that you don't want to meet. You never walk through the forest alone at night, and you don't swim in the water with gators and snakes, unless you have a death wish. The place is alive with all manner of natural wildlife, both documented in science books, and others wholly unknown to mankind. Once you come to terms with those rules, life can be calm and beautiful. That's not to say that a person can't find themselves mired in unexpected situations, because they absolutely can. One night not long ago, I found myself unintentionally breaking just about every local rule of the swamp. My car had run out of gas at 3 in the morning in the middle of a long bayou road. I was coming home from a party and should have found a hotel room nearby, but I hate to pay for a room when my home is only a 45-mile drive away. Not surprisingly, there was no cell signal to call for a roadside assistance. Telecommunications providers do not put cell towers in the middle of nowhere. It's a waste of money to offer phone service to the crawling swamp dwellers, and they assume no woman would be unwise enough to drive through such a desolate place at night. I cursed my foolish decision to ignore the low fuel light and accepted that I had a very long, creepy walk ahead of me. The nearest residence of any sort was at least a dozen miles away. I grabbed a flashlight from the glove compartment and changed out of my dress to clothes. As a lady who comes prepared for most situations, I had a pair of comfortable walking shoes and a jogging suit in the back seat. With any luck, another damn fool would pass by the abandoned road and offer me a ride. Just to be careful, I grabbed a hunting knife I keep under the seat for protection. Some of the most dangerous creatures on the bayou are opportunists of the human variety. I didn't want to run into one of them either. Once outside my stranded car, the nighttime sounds of the southern jungle came alive. The birds and the cicadas were competing to see which of them could make the most racket. It might have been soothing under different circumstances, but I just wanted to get home. Cautiously, I made my way beside the foggy road until my blinking hazard lights slowly faded from view. Various amphibians and reptiles crept and crawled in the nearby grass. There were no streetlights or the familiar glow of industrial twilight to aid in my journey. The night animals of the swamp seemed to be curious over why I was walking among them. I hoped my flashlight was enough to discourage them from getting too close. I heard twigs snap on the ground in the woods, but I tried to not let my imagination run away with me. Then the jarring plop of a frog into the murky bog or a hoot of an owl would startle me. I reminded myself that I was invading their territory. Hopefully they would let me pass unmolested. The bullfrogs were chanting their eternal mating call when I heard the distant sound of a large creature following me behind me. It definitely wasn't my imagination, since there were no brown bears in the area. I held the knife tightly in my fist. You can't outrun or outswim something like that, so I prepared myself to fight back if necessary. It's hard to make yourself intimidating to a 7-foot-tall, hungry carnivore or wolf when you're only 5'2" and weigh 120 pounds. My flashlight served as an unintentional beacon to draw attention to myself, but I had to leave it on. I would have gladly walked into the dark, but the frequent number of cottonmouths and copperheads slithering across the road tend to blend in with the pavement. I quickened my pace a bit without wanting to telegraph my eternal fear. I don't think I was successful though. Whatever it was, the unknown predator was definitely stalking me. I didn't dare turn around and shine my flashlight at it. Part of me didn't even want to know what it was. We were both pretending I was alone while I tried to remain calm. It was a game I was losing. The knife felt inadequate and my batteries were noticeably dimmer than when I'd started. I tried to focus on the sounds of my shoes on the asphalt, but all I heard was the unwelcome shuffling behind me. I didn't have any means of gauging my forward progress, but I couldn't have walked more than a few miles. It's not like I was within shouting distance of civilization either. All that mattered at the moment was that the large creature was following me for an unknown reason, matching each step and staying a discreet distance behind me. There was a certain intelligence behind its sly actions. It was the darkest point of the night, where the moon cast almost no reflection. I was being followed by a very cunning adversary. At times I dared to stop abruptly in my tracks, just to see what it would do. I wondered if the unknown predator would remain and maintain the same distance between us, or immediately pounce since the secret was over. I knew I couldn't outrun the thing. I wanted to turn the psychological tables. On those occasions I briefly caught my lurking shadow off guard. It stopped following as soon as I realised it had stopped moving, but the short delay in reaction gave me a quick sound reference. It didn't have the recognisable four-legged cadence of a bear or coyote, and the footfalls were too heavy for an ordinary wildcat. My aggressive bluster was probably ill-advised with the serious disadvantages that I had, but I wanted to get inside the thing's head to let it know that I was aware of its sinister presence close behind me. Barn owls screeched in the trees, as if to warn me of the danger I already knew about. I started getting very angry at the prolonged waves of adrenaline surging through my frightened veins. I almost turned around to confront the unknown beast, but its footfalls grew more insistent. I lost my nerve and quickened my pace. The heavy footsteps were right behind me now, no more than 10 steps back. Slithering snakes and alligators be damned, I was about to turn off the flashlight and take off in an all-out sprint, when I saw a welcome sight. Pale headlights cut through the dense fog and shined on the road beside me. I let out a blood-curdling scream and ran toward the car. I waved my arms erratically, but it was necessary. They saw me right away and thankfully stopped. "Jesus, lady, get in! Get in quick! Didn't you see that huge thing right behind you?" I started to tell the man that it had been stalking me for a couple of miles, when my Bayou saviour continued. "That thing definitely wasn't human. It was way too large and primal looking. It was naked and had hair or fur all over it. My lord, it must be a big The lady driver cut him off. No, don't even say it, Jed. I saw the same thing as you did, but no one will believe it. Just keep that little conspiracy theory to yourself. We'll be the laughing stock of the entire parish, as if we aren't all ready for that matter. Excuse me, ma'am. Was that your stranded Altima we passed back there on the shoulder? I advise you to wait until daylight before going to pick it up, unless you want to run back into your big furry friend. You'll probably need a jump too. It looked like your battery was almost dead." We all laughed at the obviously sound advice and understatement. I thanked them profusely for coming along when they did. They saved me from an uncertain fate at the hands of a large unknown creature stalking stranded motorists in the Louisiana Bayou. As I stated at the beginning, there are certain truths you must accept here in the swamp. Above all, never take late night drives down a long Bayou road on an empty fuel tank. There are worse things lurking here in the woods than gators and snakes. Dogman in my driveway. First of all, I do wish to stay anonymous due to safety reasons. It was a quiet Saturday night at about 9 p.m, and I was enjoying a glass of cheap discounter whiskey and a cigarette on my back porch while listening to my old blues records. About 1 hour later, I noticed that the whole area had gone dead quiet. No birds singing and no crickets chirping. That's odd, I thought to myself. But suddenly, I heard something that sounded like my trash cans being thrown around the whole place. So I grabbed my flashlights and went to my driveway. I figured it was just a raccoon or on the search for some dinner, which angered me because I'd always put a brick on the lid so that these pesky little bastards wouldn't leave a mess every morning. Anyway, as I was saying, I went to my driveway ready to scare them off. I put gloves and construction boots on as a safety measure, just in case one of them got brave enough to take a bite out of me, and I did not want to get infected with rabies. So, I opened the door to the driveway, and I heard heavy breathing. "This can't be a coon," I mumbled. The heavy breathing was interrupted by an occasional crunching sound. As I directed my flashlight towards the source of the noise, I almost soiled myself when two big, and I mean big, yellow eyes reflected from behind the trash cans. Their eyes were about 4 feet off the ground until the creature raised to its full height, which had to be at least 7.5 feet tall. As it rose up, I was frozen in place. It had white, greyish fur and a long muzzle filled with razor-sharp fangs. Its stench, mixed with the old garbage which was scattered all over the place, was so overwhelming that I had to throw up in my mouth, and I forced it down again. Since I didn't know how it would react when I just bent over and relieved myself, so We continued to stare at each other. It didn't seem hostile in any way, it just seemed, well, curious. About 30 seconds later it lifted its head and sniffed the air. It took a quick look at me and turned into the woods. And it was walking. I do not shit you. It was walking on bipedal fashion. But let me tell you, it took some time until I could feel my legs again. I was absolutely restless for the next 2 weeks. Since that fateful day, I live in constant fear. My life has become a hellhole. I twitch at every occurring noise around my house. I have to take heavy medication to calm my nerves. My life will never be the same, ever again. A fresh perspective on lycanthropy, mythology, in light of new historical evidence. Let's get straight into that. Last summer, a forestry survey in the heart of the Scottish Highlands made an exciting discovery. A small cave system was revealed, and within were skeletal remains of what was thought to be a middle-aged male. Subsequent analysis revealed the overall condition of the remains were excellent. However, there were several points to note. Firstly, both maxillary canines appeared to be removed shortly before the death, as the extraction socket showed no sign of remodelling. The dentition was otherwise in good condition. Additionally, both ulnae were damaged near the wrists. The right had a simple fracture, and the left had a comminuted fracture. Trace analysis revealed high levels of iron embedded in the bones. The skeleton was not the most exciting find, however. A journal sealed in wax covers, and thus almost entirely preserved from the elements. I am a translator, part of a team of linguists, anthropologists, and historians tasked with revealing the history of the find. I will herein present partial translations of the text, which was primarily written in Old English, Latin, and medieval Gaelic, as well as some overall context notes regarding the passages where possible, and some of our own theories on what is described. Lycanthropy, or werewolf mythology, is abundant in European folklore. However, there is little written documentation of this subject linked to this region of Scotland. There are folk legends such as Amphir Liathmore, a large grey predator said to inhabit the mountain ranges. There is also reference from the late 900s to a Norse documentation of raiders around the Hebridean Islands on Scotland's west coast. Unusually for seafarers, the men ventured inland to the mainland to gather wood for repairing their ships. The party were allegedly attacked and chased away by men described as grey-skinned and fanged. This tale, however, was considered unremarkable and just one of the countless myths told among bored travellers. However, the contents of this new document may cast a different light on such accounts. The text in the journal of the expedition written by a monk named Friar Augustine in the year 1270. The friar was clearly an educated and literate man who was sent north alongside 40 soldiers at the behest of Alexander III of Scotland to investigate claims made by the Earl of Dunachtar. Augustine's role was to serve as a record keeper and translator on the journey. While this expedition and the subsequent disappearance of the men are part of the historical record, it was largely an obscure event attributed to an under-equipped team perishing in the spring freeze. Not uncommon in the Highlands. Historical accounts suggest that Earl was underpaying taxes owed to the Crown, and the men were sent to collect these debts. The next text, however, clarifies not only where the men were to collect the duty, but to investigate the claims as to why the payment was withheld. The Earl claimed much of his land was unable to be colonised, farmed or forested, as there was an infestation of wolves which terrified the local clansmen and shattered the local economy. King Alexander would not accept this as told, and felt the Earl would be found lying, he would need to be made an example of. The first portion of the text is a comprehensive but uneventful documentation, more a ledger than a journal. Descriptions of the men, 40 in all, although 10 were squires under the age of 16, horses 10, and supplies abundant, and the journey to Dunachtar via the relatively stable major roads was uneventful. Whilst in Dunachtar, Augustine writes, "Before our onward journey west, I attend the church to request my fellow men of God pray for our party and bless our venture into the unknown. After the service, the brothers invited me to meet a young orphan whom they were sheltering. She was found wandering the hills by a shepherd who delivered her to the town. They told me she no longer spoke, but would scream and cry in her sleep. I prayed for her, that she would overcome the sadness of her past. During a period of resupplying in Dunatar, Augustine reveals the captain of the expedition, a Richard Harris, spoke to the Earl, but no account of this discussion is provided. Around this time, it becomes evident that Augustine was developing concerns about the expedition. He reports, "They warned me about the cold and how freezing snow can persist into May, catching many travellers unaware. Furthermore, the horses will be useless, they say, unable to travel the terrain at any speed and more likely to burden us than their need to carry the fodder. At this time of year, they will find little growing naturally." I relayed my concern to the Captain Harris as I returned to camp, but he still refuses to hear talk of postponing the trip, lest he or our king lose face. The next day, I paid for the smith to reshoe the horses, as instructed. Note: accounts of both the weather and terrain are of note, and not likely simply exaggerated warnings of the locals. This region was far more densely forested in the 1200s than it is today. Additionally, there is evidence that at this time Northern Europe was exiting a period of relative warm known as the medieval warm period, and experienced record low temperatures. Within a fortnight of departing Dunatar, Augustine's fears became realised. The snows did not let up for days. 4 of the horses died of exposure, and when the storm broke, 2 of the squires tried to desert and return to Dunatar on foot. One perished in the night, and the other was barely alive when he was discovered in the morning. Harris ordered him hanged. We could not break the ground to dig a grave, so we buried them under a tomb of rocks. Though they rest far from their homes, I pray the Lord welcome them into heaven. From this point, Augustine's account is minimal for several weeks. Presumably, he was feeling the attrition of the journey, physically and spiritually. As would be the rest of the men, 3 more deaths are detailed. 1 man fell through ice and could not be recovered. Another developed a fatal fever, and a 3rd committed suicide. Augustine's last entry as a free man reads simply: "We broke camp this morning and reached denser forest. While sheltered from the cold, the passage is slowed by the trees. The horses were lethargic of late, but seem to be more alert. Perhaps the shelter has buoyed their spirits." The next several entries I will transcribe in full, with minimal notes. Each entry appears to reflect a different day. However, no dates are recorded, so perhaps there was a period of confusion where the passage of time slipped. I write this by moonlight from an outdoor cage. We face bleak prospects now. Our party was ambushed by wolves and men. In total, we are 12 captured men, so I suppose 23 were killed. Perhaps some escaped into the forest. If so, I pray a miracle delivers them to safety. Our assailants seem to work together, like a shepherd and his dogs, rounding us up like cattle. Some of the men are convinced our captures are not human, but demons. They are large. The smallest is bigger than our largest man. They have grey skin and wear furs. Some of them have grotesque fangs, and they communicate by speech, but the language I do not recognize. They transported our dead brothers' corpses to their camp on 2 of our horses. They have taken our weapons from us. However, I feel they did us little good. Harris died unceremoniously. They took few casualties. However, Angus killed a wolf. It damaged his arm badly with its fangs, and I can hear him suffering. This day, the savages seem to be celebrating. I watched numbly as they ate the flesh of our men corpses raw, and cracked the bones to drink the marrow. We are not fed, but none of us could eat anyway. One of the largest warriors approached our cage with an older tribesman, maybe the leader. They were both fanged. They pointed at Angus and his broken arm and talked to each other. He was then moved to a cage of his own. 2 women came and tended to his arm as the tribesman held him down. The woman did not have fangs, but they are grey, like the men. Men also removed their shoes from the captive's horses' feet. The horses have not been harmed, but are kept locked in isolation. Note: the point about salvaging the horseshoes is interesting. We believe that the tribesmen may have encountered shoed horses before. Their salvage of the shoes might indicate an ability to rework metal, but not to create it. My faith has never been tested to this degree. Today, I have witnessed horrors beyond imagination. I record them only so men of God may learn of the evil that inhabits this earth. Today, the savages came and took 2 of our men. They were led into the centre of the camp, brought forth to an altar. They were restrained and their jaws forced apart. A fanged elder ripped teeth from their top jaws, one from each side, by using a sharp spike to damage their gums. The assembled savages cried in delight when each tooth was removed. Angus was taken to the same altar and his teeth were removed in the same way. The skull of the wolf he killed was brought forth and the fangs were removed. These are much larger than a man's and look harder to remove. The skull was smashed to release them. The roots once embedded in bone were smoothed and trimmed. The teeth were then hammered into the holes of Angus's jaw and his jaws were bound tightly. The first two men were then led out of camp. Angus was tied to a bed in the centre of camp. He was draped in the skin of the wolf he killed. The women let him sip from a bowl and rubbed his skin with ash and changed his bandages on his arm. That night, wolves howled. I have been reading to the Romanian men from my Bible daily. Several of them are not responsive, but I believe the word still reached them. It has been several days since Angus was brutalised and we cannot tell if he is alright. Every few days 2 more men are taken, their teeth removed, and then they are led away. I cannot bear to speculate on their fate, for it can only be ruin. Every night the savages emit screams and the wolves respond. Note, emit screams. It does not translate easily. It is hard to determine whether he is conveying that these are vocalised noises or created using some kind of instrument. Today Angus was released from his chains and the bound on his jaws was severed. He tugged at his new fangs but could not remove them. His skin is grey like the savages and he wears his wolf skin. He was offered raw flesh, but he refused it. This buoyed my spirits as he proved he would not engage in savagery, despite their abominations that had been forced upon him. We are down to 5 men. It was a dark day. 2 more of our captive brethren were taken. Angus gave to his hunger, and has cannibalized human flesh. I fear that he may never enter the kingdom of our Lord now. I have prayed for his soul and forgiveness. I read aloud from the Bible, damning these creatures. It was taken from me and burned. The final entry was hard to translate, simply because of the legibility is so poor. I write by dawn's light as God has finally deemed to spare my life. Yesterday, as only 3 of us remained in captivity, the savages came to take 2 more. As one of the chosen was a squire, I pleaded they spare him on the account of his youth, and take me instead. Alas, they took us all. Our teeth were ripped out to the cheers of the gathered tribe, and they marched us outside. I could barely walk, and I had grown so weak. It felt like a long walk, but it can't have been far. There, I saw the fate of our friends. On the ground, anchored to the rock, were iron manacles. My 2 brothers were chained in place. As there were no more manacles for me, they began to tie me to a tree with rope. I took my crucifix in hand for a final prayer, but the master of the ceremony grabbed it and stared curiously. They talked and gestured and laughed, and the rope was removed. Soon, a savage brought forth 2 long nails and a hammer, and my wrists were pinned to the tree. The savages departed, and before long the howls commenced. I thought about how I had suffered up to now, and how that was but a fraction of what some of my brothers endured. And still, this was nothing compared to what our Lord suffered to save us. I ripped my arms free from the pins, numb to the agony, and I ran. As the wolves descended on my chained brothers, I entered the forest, and by grace of God, I collapsed into a tunnel. It is warm and dry, and once my strength gathers, I will return to the Christian world. My tale will be told, but for now, I must rest. Wow. Hope you guys enjoyed that small collection of stories there. As ever, huge thank you to the authors, particularly the last story there, the lycanthropy perspective and mythology in the light of a new historical evidence. Absolutely fantastic writing there, and got my dramatic flair on there. As ever, guys, please do let me know down below in the comments what you thought. Please do like and share. If you haven't subscribed to DMT, smash the subscribe button and kick the notification bell into the stratosphere to stay up to date with all DMT content. We are very, very nearly at 5,000 subscribers, and I can't wait to hit 10k in the future. Thank you all so much, as ever, for your support and kind words. Hope you're having a wonderful, wonderful weekend. And above all, remember, be safe, not sorry.